The international community has witnessed an escalating confrontation between the United States and European nations over Greenland, marking a potentially transformative moment in transatlantic relations. What began as seemingly erratic political rhetoric has evolved into concrete economic threats, forcing European decision-makers to confront uncomfortable realities about their strategic autonomy and defensive capabilities. Recent developments have shattered any remaining illusions that this issue might simply fade away. Following joint military maneuvers conducted by multiple European nations in Greenland's territory, Washington responded with announcements of punitive economic measures. The proposed levies would begin at a tenth of product values next month, potentially increasing to a quarter by summer, contingent upon Copenhagen's willingness to transfer sovereignty of the Arctic territory. Senior American financial officials have articulated a stark perspective on the situation. Their position suggests that European nations have limited alternatives when it comes to security arrangements. References to ongoing Eastern European conflicts underscore the dependency relationship, with implications that withdrawal of American support could prove catastrophic for European interests in those regions. This confrontation represents more than a bilateral dispute over territorial control. It signals a fundamental challenge to the existing security architecture that has governed transatlantic relations for generations. European capitals are gradually, albeit reluctantly, coming to terms with their vulnerable position in this new geopolitical landscape. The American justification centers on national security imperatives. However, the methods employed, demanding territorial concessions through economic coercion, represent a departure from traditional alliance management. European observers note the troubling precedent of using trade policy as a weapon to extract political concessions from long-standing partners and allies. Emerging analysis suggests that European responses must evolve beyond diplomatic protests and procedural delays. The continent faces a choice between accommodation and resistance, with significant implications either way. Many strategic thinkers argue that only credible counterpressure can establish a sustainable equilibrium. This situation demands conceptual frameworks more commonly associated with hard security calculations than the cooperative approaches European institutions typically favor. Concepts such as deterrence theory, credible signaling, and strategic advantage in escalatory dynamics have become relevant to trade policy discussions in ways previously confined to military planning. The fundamental problem stems from patterns of acquiescence. Repeated retreats from confrontation have established expectations of European flexibility that now shape American assumptions. Breaking this cycle requires demonstrating resolve through actions rather than rhetoric. Mid-20th century strategic thinking offers relevant insights for the current predicament. Scholars who shaped nuclear-age strategy understood that avoiding conflict sometimes required preparing for it. Their work on bargaining between superpowers emphasized that peace often depended on both sides understanding the costs of aggression. These thinkers developed frameworks for managing competition between powerful actors seeking advantage while avoiding catastrophic outcomes. Their insights centered on credibility, making threats believable through specificity and commitment mechanisms that eliminated ambiguity about responses to provocation. A key insight involved removing one's own discretion to back down. The most effective deterrents were those structured so that failure to respond would be impossible or prohibitively costly to the party making the threat. This paradoxically increased stability by making potential aggressors confident about consequences. Strategic analysis from research institutions during the nuclear era contributed additional concepts regarding competitive escalation. The essential insight was that in conflicts that developed through successive rounds of retaliation, the party more willing to absorb costs and continue responding would eventually dominate. Recognition of this asymmetry could prevent conflicts from starting. Understanding these dynamics helps explain recent European military activities in Greenland. The modest scale of the exercises suggests their purpose was not battlefield defense against a vastly superior force. Rather, they served a different strategic function. Historical examples illuminate this approach. During Cold War tensions, certain vulnerable positions were militarily indefensible yet strategically critical. The solution involved stationing forces that would inevitably become casualties in any attack, thereby ensuring that limited aggression would trigger broader conflict. This created powerful disincentives against what might otherwise seem like manageable military operations. Adversaries faced the prospect that even successful tactical actions could escalate into strategic catastrophes. The logic was that uncertainty about escalation pathways provided stability through caution. Similarly, military presence by multiple alliance members in disputed territory creates entanglement. Any action against that territory risks triggering a broader political crisis involving numerous actors. This appears to have influenced the recent shift from military posturing toward economic pressure. European institutions do possess tools for economic confrontation, though their willingness to deploy them remains uncertain. After years of debate about vulnerability to trade weaponization, European officials developed mechanisms for economic retaliation against coercive practices. These instruments, established recently, provide extensive authorities for economic countermeasures. Available options include restricting market access, limiting investment flows, modifying intellectual property protections, and controlling trade flows with states engaging in economic coercion. The framework's potential power is substantial, at least theoretically. However, it has never been activated in actual conflict. Procedural requirements include investigation periods and consultation processes, providing multiple opportunities for member states to obstruct deployment. Historically, larger economies within the European bloc have resisted activation due to concerns about damage to their export interests. Currently, these economic tools lack credibility as deterrents. Some European officials have suggested that merely possessing such capabilities provides protection. This fundamentally misunderstands deterrence principles. Weapons that adversaries doubt will be used fail to deter. A comparison to fictional doomsday devices captures the paradox. In classic cinema, a weapon designed to automatically respond to attack failed as a deterrent because its existence remained secret. European economic countermeasures face the opposite problem. Widely discussed, but apparently never to be employed, they similarly fail to deter. The current situation represents precisely the scenario these tools were designed to address. Economic pressure is being applied to force political concessions. Yet European responses remain tentative and divided. European deliberations reveal significant disagreement about appropriate responses. While some member states have proposed activating available countermeasure frameworks, others advocate for continued dialogue before escalation. Major European economies insist that any response must protect their particular commercial interests, especially export relationships. This exemplifies the challenge these instruments were meant to overcome. Critics observe that European decision-making processes themselves become obstacles to credible deterrence. The procedural complexity and requirement for consensus mean that adversaries can reasonably expect delays, divisions, and ultimate inaction. American officials have openly expressed skepticism about European resolve, suggesting that bureaucratic processes will prevent substantive action. European behavior thus far provides little evidence to challenge these assessments. Strategic logic suggests that retaining independence requires demonstrating willingness to defend it. Available economic instruments, despite their limitations, represent the most viable option for meaningful response. The process of activation should begin immediately, with public announcement of specific measures under consideration. This would signal seriousness and create the credibility currently lacking. Potential measures could target areas where American interests are particularly exposed. Technology sector intellectual property represents one vulnerable domain. The framework also permits targeting individuals and enterprises acting on behalf of coercive governments. These authorities remain largely untested, creating uncertainty about their scope and impact. However, this uncertainty could be weaponized against the current situation where business interests have become closely aligned with political power. Wealthy individuals and corporations that have positioned themselves to benefit from the proposed territorial transfer might discover unexpected vulnerabilities. Those anticipating commercial opportunities from natural resource extraction or experimental governance arrangements may find the costs exceed their expectations. Aggressive economic countermeasures carry obvious dangers. The most severe risk involves potential American withdrawal from European security commitments, particularly regarding ongoing conflicts in Eastern Europe. Such an outcome would be catastrophic for European interests. However, This outcome would also impose severe costs on American interests and leadership. Financial markets would likely react negatively to complete breakdown of transatlantic cooperation. The damage to American global influence from abandoning traditional allies could be substantial and enduring. Beyond immediate crisis management, this situation exposes structural weaknesses in European strategic culture and institutions. The difficulty in achieving consensus for decisive action reflects deeper challenges about collective decision-making and burden sharing. Reform discussions will need to address how European institutions can respond more rapidly and coherently to strategic challenges. The requirement for unanimity creates vulnerabilities that adversaries can exploit through dividing member states or paralyzing decision processes. Questions about defense spending, capability development, and strategic autonomy have gained urgency. The reliability of traditional security guarantees has become uncertain, forcing reconsideration of assumptions that have guided policy for decades. 16. Economic interdependence reconsidered. This crisis also prompts reassessment of economic interdependence as a source of stability. Traditional European thinking held that deep commercial integration created mutual interests in cooperation and peaceful relations. Current experience suggests that asymmetric dependencies can be weaponized rather than providing mutual restraint. Future European policy may place greater emphasis on reducing vulnerabilities from concentrated dependencies. This could involve diversifying trading relationships, developing domestic capabilities in strategic sectors, and building resilience against economic coercion. These developments unfold against a background of broader changes in international order. Multiple powers are testing boundaries of acceptable behavior and challenging existing norms about sovereignty and territorial integrity. How Europe responds to current pressure will be observed globally. Weakness invites further pressure not only from current adversaries, but from others watching to assess resolve. Conversely, successful defense of European interests could strengthen deterrence more broadly. The situation also has implications for other middle powers and regional organizations facing pressure from larger neighbors. European success or failure in maintaining autonomy against economic coercion will influence calculations worldwide. Europe confronts a defining choice about its future role and independence. The comfortable assumptions of recent decades that alliance relationships were permanent, that economic integration guaranteed peace, that soft power could substitute for hard security capabilities, have been severely challenged. The path forward requires uncomfortable adjustments. Strategic thinking must incorporate concepts and calculations previously considered unnecessary. Institutions designed for consensus and cooperation must develop capacity for confrontation and competition. Political cultures oriented toward compromise must cultivate willingness to accept risks in defense of vital interests. The specific question of Greenland may prove less significant than how Europe responds to the challenge. Establishing credible deterrence now could prevent escalating demands later. Demonstrating resolve could stabilize a relationship that currently appears dangerously unstable. Conversely, continued hesitation risks confirming perceptions of weakness that will invite further pressure. The tools exist for meaningful response. What remains uncertain is whether political will exist to deploy them. That question will likely be answered in coming weeks and months, with consequences that extend far beyond the immediate crisis. The fundamental issue is whether European nations can overcome institutional inertia, national divisions, and strategic timidity to defend collective interests. The answer will shape not only transatlantic relations, but Europe's position in an increasingly competitive international environment. This moment demands clarity about priorities and willingness to defend them. The cost of action involves risk and potential pain. But the cost of continued inaction may be progressive loss of autonomy and increasing vulnerability to external pressure. Neither option is comfortable, but choices cannot be avoided indefinitely.